And welcome back, everybody. On this week's episode of the Rugby Review, we're going to be going through the quarterfinals of the URC, or the United Rugby Championship. And just a quick reminder as to what the quarterfinal bracket looked like. Here are the matchups from this past weekend. At the top of the bracket, we have the 1-8 matchup between Glasgow and Connacht. Underneath that game, we have the 4-5 matchup between the Bulls and Munster. Underneath that is the 2-7 game between Leinster and the Lions. And the last game at the bottom of the bracket is the 3-6 matchup between the Stormers and Cardiff. And so here are the final results from the quarterfinals. The first game of the weekend was the 1-8 matchup between Glasgow and Connacht. And despite being, the hottest team, Connacht, heading into this game, I think they won 8 of the previous 9 games heading into this game. So despite being the hottest team in the URC heading into this game, Glasgow was able to hold on to their lead and secure the victory by a score of 33-21 over Connacht. Following that game was the 4-5 matchup between the Bulls and Munster, and this ended up being a very one-sided affair where the Bulls dominated the game and won by a score of 45-14. Following that game was the 3-6 game between Stormers and Cardiff. So this was a round 18 rematch. And the Stormers were actually able to get the better of Cardiff in this game, and in very dominant fashion nonetheless. The Stormers were able to win this game by a score of 44-21. And the last game of the weekend was the 2-7 matchup between Leinster and the Lions. This was actually a round 17 rematch, coincidentally, as well. And Leinster was able to absolutely dominate this game. So this was the third game that was dominated by one team. So Leinster secured the victory in this game. They ended up winning the game by a score of 59-10 over the Lions. So that's all the results from the 4 games in the quarterfinals. We're going to take a closer look at each game now and kind of go through the stats in a little bit more depth. And so the first game, again, for the quarterfinals was the Glasgow-Connacht matchup. Glasgow was able to secure the victory, ended up winning the game 33-21. I will say in the first half, this was a very, very even game. I'm pretty confident, if I remember correctly, the game went into half tied 14-14, or it was like 14-12, something like that. It was very physical, very defensive first half, where a lot of running was done, but it seemed like both teams defensively were able to kind of bend but don't break despite giving up 2 tries apiece. But then in the second half, at the very beginning, Glasgow looked like they were shot out of a cannon. They were able to score 2 times within the first 10 minutes of the second half. Connacht was able to work their way back. I believe they got within 1 score, and then Connacht scored 2 more tries at the very end of Glasgow ended up scoring 2 more tries at the very end of the game, extending the lead and securing their victory for this game. But again, Connacht, one of the hottest teams coming into the playoffs, having won a lot of games over the previous 2 months in competition, so Glasgow is going to have their hands full. And by and large, this was a fairly even game, again, between the 2 teams. One team would score, the other team would answer. and then a second half surge is what allowed Glasgow to maintain their leads throughout the second half. So, looking at possession and territory, very even between the two teams, which, having watched the game makes a lot of sense. The game was kind of played all across the field in both halves. Again, this was a hugely physical game. Both teams had to attempt over 200 tackles. Both teams attempted 217 tackles. Didn't miss very many of them. Connacht missed 29. Glasgow only missed 22 out of the 217 they attempted, so really good conversion rate for both teams. Connacht does have the edge in meters gained by about 80. So again, this was a very even game, very back and forth game. Both teams were running, as we can see by a lot of meters gained between both teams. I will say the two biggest things that stood out was the turnovers won, turnovers lost. I know Glasgow, I will say, only had 6, but in comparison to 2 for Connacht, it's 3 times as many, so that's a lot of turnovers won in comparison to Connacht. And then I did notice watching this game, especially towards the end of the game, handling errors kind of started to mount up for Connacht, which kind of killed their offensive flow, especially at the end of the game. So having 9 turnovers lost for Connacht to just 5 for Glasgow doesn't seem like a big difference, but in a quarterfinal, it's massive. So, really good for Glasgow to play a very strong full 80 minutes to get the victory over Connacht. Unfortunate for Connacht that their season comes to an end this way, but this is sports. One team wins, one team loses. So Connacht will be back to the drawing board next year, and maybe they'll be able to start next season with the momentum that they kind of caught on about halfway through this season. So good for Glasgow to move on to the semifinals. And then we'll see what Connacht can bring to the table next year. So again, second game after that was a very one-sided game between the Bulls and Munster. This game was down in Pretoria in the Bulls' home stadium, and it was a very, very one-sided game. It was a very strong, dominant forward pack performance by the Bulls. They had very strong defensive effort throughout this entire game. Bulls were just very efficient as well. And so as we kind of look through the stats of this game, you'll kind of see that as well. Obviously, Bulls have the tries scored advantage. 6 tries scored for the Bulls to just 2 for Munster. Interestingly enough, possession plus territory is in Munster's advantage during the course of this game. Didn't seem to help too much. Again, Bulls had a very, very, very strong defensive effort during the course of this game. They had 190 tackle attempts and only ended up missing 22, whereas Munster had 155, so they had to put in a pretty good defensive shift as well. But they ended up missing 38 of those tackles, so a significant number more tackles missed for Munster than the Bulls. And the Bulls did a great job taking advantage of that. Bulls did a great job utilizing their defense and converting it into offense. So again, Bulls had to attempt a significant number more of tackles during the course of the game. They did a better job of hitting and sticking their tackles. They didn't have nearly as many missed tackles. With all of the missed tackles that Munster had, the Bulls did a great job converting those to clean breaks. 38 missed tackles for Munster. The Bulls converted that to 21 clean breaks and ended up having 646 meters gained on the day. Whereas Munster had 6 clean breaks, on 22 missed tackles for the Bulls, and I will say only had 327 when compared to over 600 for the opposite team. Just a huge difference between the two teams there. Munster, very strong, dominant defensively. They were able to be a very strong, dominant team offensively as well. Just played a very full game of rugby, both offensively and defensively. And just had a very dominant performance and secured their spot in the semifinals very emphatically. So, great win for the Bulls, again, securing their spot in the semifinals. The Bulls will be actually traveling up to Scotland to play Glasgow in the next round. So that should be a very, very fun game to watch. And then, unfortunate for Munster to have their season come to an end, but for those that aren't going on in Ireland summer tour, their bodies will be able to recover and recoup and get ready for next year. The third game of the weekend was again between the Stormers and Cardiff. This was not the most one-sided game of the weekend, but was definitely a one-sided game as well. This was a game dominated by the Stormers, and it felt like Cardiff was just holding on. I don't know if it was desperately holding on, but it just felt like Cardiff was trying to just hold on the best they could, and Stormers were just constantly putting pressure on Cardiff and able to take advantage of holes that were, made in the defensive line for Cardiff. Cardiff did also end up having, I think it was 2 yellow cards that gave a really, good advantage to the Stormers having the extra man on the field. And again, round 18 rematch, Cardiff. No, so round 18 was played up in Cardiff. This game was played down in Cape Town? Yes, Cape Town. And it's quite a different outcome from round 18. So let's start from the top, obviously, with the scoreline in favor of the Stormers. It makes sense that try scored is in favor of the Stormers. Possession plus territory heavily favored, especially territory heavily favored towards the Stormers. Again, Stormers did a really great job of putting Cardiff under a bunch of defensive pressure. Cardiff ended up having to attempt 192 tackles to just 107 for the Stormers. Cardiff did not do a great job having they were not very well disciplined defensively. They ended up missing 45 of the 192 tackles they attempted, whereas Stormers missed 16 of the 107 that they attempted, so just a huge difference there. With the possession advantage during the course of the game, Stormers were able to easily have much more meters gained during the course of the game than Cardiff, as Stormers had 547 meters made during the course of this game, whereas Cardiff had 295. So again, with that possession advantage, Stormers were able to have a very large advantage in the meters gained, forcing Cardiff to play defense going backwards. Cardiff just, again, being put under a lot of defensive pressure during the course of this game. You can also see that it led to quite a bit of ill discipline for Cardiff during the course of this game. Again, they had a couple of yellow cards, and Cardiff ended up conceding 15 penalties during the course of this game to just 8 for the Stormers. So it was a really, really, really strong game by the Stormers. Couple of high moments. Cardiff was able to score 3 times during the course of this game, but ultimately Stormers were the much more dominant team during the course of this game, secured their spot in the semifinals, and they will they'll have to be traveling up to Europe this up and coming weekend, so good for the Stormers, and just like the other two teams, tough for Cardiff, but that's the way the cookie crumbles this time of the year. And let's quickly go through our last game of the weekend. It was absolute domination by Leinster over the Lions. Round 17 rematch. Round 17's game was a lot closer than this one was. I don't remember the final score, but it was much closer than what we were given here. I will say the first half, the game felt much closer than the second half. First half was a very, very strong showing by Leinster. Leinster was able to have possession plus territory domination in the first half. Big defensive shift for the Lions in the first half as well, the whole game really. But big defensive shift in the first half for the Lions. Didn't seem like the wheels were really falling off for the Lions at the moment, but they headed into halftime down a couple scores, but then come the second half, Leinster kicked it into high gear and just blew this game wide open, and just Lions in the second half just ultimately did not have any hope for coming back. Leinster, on both sides of the ball, had the Lions under a lot of pressure, and Leinster was just able to do seemingly whatever they wanted, it felt like. So, just a really strong performance by Leinster. Tough loss for the Lions. And as we're going through these stats here, it's very, very evident that Leinster was the stronger, much more dominant team. More tries scored for Leinster. Possession plus territory heavily skewed towards Leinster. 60+% for both possession and territory in Leinster's favor. Lots of defensive effort by the Lions. 182 tackle attempts to just 101 for Leinster. Kind of a lot of missed tackles for the Lions this game, with 31 missed tackles to 18 for Leinster. But it was really Leinster's ability to convert those missed tackles to clean breaks that was a huge difference maker, or one of the many big difference makers in this game. So, again, 31 missed tackles for the Lions. Leinster converted that to 17 clean breaks. Just great conversion right there for Leinster. And then, with all of those clean breaks, Leinster ultimately was able to have a lot of meters gained during the course of this game as well. 483 meters gained, just huge number in comparison to what the Lions were able to do. So, Lions, off 18 missed tackles for Leinster, Lions only were able to get 4 clean breaks, which then resulted in 186 meters gained. So, kind of showcases how much defensive pressure and how much defense the Lions had to play this particular game. But unlike previous games and weeks where the Lions had to soak up a lot of defensive pressure, the Lions did not do a great job being very efficient with ball in hand when they had it. Lots of handling errors on the part of the Lions, on top of a very strong performance by Leinster. Kind of ultimately leads to the outcome that we had. So 14 turnovers lost for the Lions, only 6 for Leinster. Huge difference there. Just a lot of handling errors for the Lions, giving the ball back to a strong team in Leinster that's being very efficient with ball in hand. So, good game for Leinster. Dominated this game, definitely secured their spot in the semifinals. And speaking of the semifinals, here are the fixtures, here are the games for the semifinals that will be taking place tomorrow. The first game of the weekend will be at Murrayfield in Edinburgh, and that game will be played between Glasgow and the Bulls, followed by Leinster versus Stormers at the Aviva in Dublin. So that is it for this week's episode. Pardon me for potentially rambling too much during the course of some of these games, or explaining some of these games. Just trying to get it all out there. So if you made it this far in the video, thanks for watching till the end. If you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, hitting the subscribe button, doing all the things for the algorithm, be greatly appreciated. I hope everybody enjoys the games this weekend, and we will be back next week talking about the semifinal games in the URC. Enjoy your rugby, and I will see you next time.